Today I wanted to talk about why I've chosen to forego traditional publishing and self-publish my first book. Right now it's titled Have Mercy. I've talked about this before in a previous video, but essentially it follows a little girl who's about 10 years old. She's had a really tough life growing up in these Philadelphia housing projects. There's a lot of stuff that happens that readers will find out very early on in the book, but one of the major things that happens to this little girl, one of the major traumas she undergoes, is she comes home from school one day to find her father dead. This actually causes her to slip in and out of a fantasy world where her only friend, her dog, his name is Dart, he becomes a knight. When she slips into this fantasy world and her dog becomes a knight, he really looks after her and protects her. But in the real world, she's being cared for by sort of an unsavory uncle until her grandmother can get out of the hospital and take care of her. To be quite honest, I've actually been lucky to get really good feedback from traditional publishers and agents. I've had a couple full manuscript requests, and I'm praised on the voice, I'm praised on the writing, but the one thing that the agents and the publishers seem not to, or to seem to be a little bit hesitant about, is the fact that Danae is just 10 years old, and the book deals with very adult themes. You know, there's violence, there's strong language in my book, drug use in my book, things that kids do see, things that personally I saw growing up. And this relates to the first video I made talking about Toni Morrison in The Bluest Eye, because that's what Toni Morrison does in her book as well. The little girl, Piccola, she's in a very, very adult world, and she really has no choice but to try to navigate it. Now, I know that in the traditional publishing world, targeting an audience is very important, and it's important in the self-publishing world as well. You know, there's no denying that. However, I do think that I have the story that I want to tell, and I know the story that I want to tell. I purposely have these adult themes in there with strong language, violence, drug use, these things that are tough for a little kid, but little kids do see these things. Growing up in the projects, you do see these things. And so I wanted my character to kind of navigate these things as well. And one thing about self-publishing, one of the many benefits of self-publishing is I can tell the story that I want to tell without compromising. I don't have to bow down to anybody. I don't have to listen to anybody. I can do what I want to do. And to be honest, that thought appeals to me. A couple of years ago in a Reddit MMA, Evan Winter, who actually self-published the book The Rage of Dragons and later got traditionally published because of its success, he talked about why he decided to forego traditional publishing and self-publish that book as well. Reading that actually kind of galvanized me a little bit, because a lot of the stuff that he said is exactly what I feel and why I chose to self-publish my book. He says, and I quote, "I chose to self-publish because I'd worked in creative industries for my entire adult life, and the work I did was always subject to the needs and goals of others. That's fine, it's what I was paid for. But before I died, I just really wanted to make something entirely for me. I wanted at least one piece of work out in the world that existed as I had hoped it would, and I was afraid that traditional publishing, if they'd even pay attention to me, which I thought was unlikely, would request too many changes and try to make my story into their story as well. So to avoid that, I self-published." Now he does go on and he does extrapolate on that, and he actually does give a little bit of praise to traditional publishing and admits that it's not what he initially believed, where he said, quote, "I should say that my expectations of traditional publishing have not matched my current experiences. I'm only one person, I've only published one book, but Orbit and my editor there have not in any way tried to change my story or make it ours." Now, I really think that hours at the end of that was important, because especially for Black content creators, or not even just Black, any men and women of color, sometimes we do want to tell a very specific story that not everybody can understand. It's cultural specific sometimes, or it's just personally specific. And we feel very close to some of these things, and maybe we are reluctant to change these things because we have a specific message. And that's why something like self-publishing, which I'm learning now, and which Evan Winter clearly has learned, is a big benefit. To be honest, I've always kind of had a desire to self-publish ever since the Kindle boom back around 2010 and moving forward. I got really, really big into self-publishing books, and I learned that there really were some great titles out there, some great writers out there, and honestly some really great cover art out there. However, for every one good self-published book, to be honest, there's 1,000 ones that are garbage. And this, I think, sometimes hurts the reputation of people who do choose to self-publish. And I think that one of the things I was hesitant about for a long time was, if I self-publish, am I going to get the respect from my writing peers and from the traditional publishing world? It's a real question. It's no joke. That's a real question. And it's a real concern. Sorry, I needed that. I'm getting myself worked up here thinking about this. Regardless of that fact, though, I think that if you put in the work and you put in the time, which I'm ready to do and which I do have a strong desire to do, you can really produce something great that's self-published. Evan Winter is a good example of that, and there's many, many others. And I really hope to become one of those examples of how a self-published artist or a self-published author and a self-published text can really shine.